The order arrived not with a shout, but with the chilling, bureaucratic silence of a telex machine. It was an order born not of strategy, but of a singular, all-consuming fury. Joseph Stalin, the vojhid, the supreme leader of the Soviet Union, had been presented with a report so absurd, so militarily embarrassing, that it defied all reason. A single man, one Finnish farmer, turned soldier. He had, according to the stunned and terrified Soviet commanders on the ground, stopped an entire Red Army battalion in its tracks. The casualty figure was circled in red: 542. 542 Soviet sons, fathers and brothers, eliminated by one man. Stalin's response was not to investigate the tactical miracle, but to erase its very possibility from the earth. He gave a command that would transform a frozen patch of Finnish forest into a symbol of unimaginable sacrifice. The command was simple: destroy that position. Not a single tree, not a single stone shall remain standing. We are in the Winter War, November 1939. The Soviet Union, having signed a pact with Nazi Germany, turns its colossal war machine north, demanding territory from its small Finnish neighbor. The world expects a swift, brutal Soviet victory, but the Finns have other plans. They know their land, a nightmarish labyrinth of frozen lakes, dense pine forests, and deep snow. And among the 2 million Finns who mobilize is a man named Aimo Koivunen. But our story today is not about Aimo. It is about his neighbor, a man whose name was never meant for headlines. A farmer, a reservist, a man who understood his patch of woods the way you or I understand the layout of our own homes. When the Soviet 44th Rifle Division, confident and rolling south towards the key road junction at Kumo, entered his forest, he was waiting. He was not a commando, he was a hunter. The critical moment arrived not with a grand charge, but with a patient, deliberate choice. This Finnish farmer, let's call him Mikko for our story, looked at the advancing column. He saw the tanks, the trucks, the hundreds of infantrymen strung out along the narrow forest road. He saw not an invincible force, but a target-rich environment. His choice was one of calculated, terrifying isolation. He did not retreat to the main Finnish lines. Instead, he melted into the white landscape. He chose his first firing position with the care of a man setting a snare for a wolf. The crack of his Mosin Nagant rifle was the first punctuation in a sentence of doom he would write for the next 5 days. He aimed not for the officers, but for the truck drivers. A stalled vehicle became a roadblock. Then he aimed for the engineers who tried to clear it, then for the commanders who shouted orders beside the stalled trucks. He moved invisibly. On skis, he flowed from one prepared position to another, a ghost in a white snowsuit. He knew every depression, every fallen log, every rock outcrop that could provide a fleeting moment of cover and a clear field of fire. The Soviets, trained for open field warfare, were fish in a barrel. A shot would ring out. A man would fall. By the time a machine gun crew could orient toward the sound, another shot would come from a different direction, 30 degrees to their left. Then silence, then another shot, from behind them. The forest, once just scenery, became a living, malevolent enemy. The smell of cordite from their own weapons mixed with the scent of pine and the metallic tang of fear. The biting cold of the Finnish winter, which numbed their fingers and feet, was nothing compared to the cold dread that now seeped into their bones. They were not fighting an army. They were being stalked by a force of nature. The psychological impact was absolute. Morale, that fragile glue of any military unit, dissolved. Soldiers refused to leave the perceived safety of their immobilized vehicles. Officers who attempted to organize a coherent skirmish line became the next targets. The battalion's advance didn't just halt. It petrified. Reports filtered up the chain of command, each more desperate than the last. They spoke of a white death, of an entire company of elite Finnish snipers. The command structure, steeped in suspicion and fear of Stalin's purges, could not admit the truth that one man was orchestrating this chaos. They inflated the enemy in their reports, but the casualty counts were real. The field kitchen grew silent, for there were too few men left to feed. The medical tents overflowed, not with the wounded, but with men suffering from a new kind of combat fatigue, a terror of the trees themselves. Then, the report landed on Stalin's desk. 542. The number was a direct insult to the power of the Soviet state. Stalin's reaction was the unexpected consequence. This was no longer a military problem, it was a political one. A challenge to his authority, to the very myth of Soviet invincibility. His order bypassed all tactical discussion. There would be no more infantry assaults into that forest. There would be no more attempts to flank the Phantom. The solution was absolute, impersonal, and devastating. He sent in the heavy artillery battalions and ordered sorties from the Soviet Air Force. What followed was not a battle, but an erasure. For 24 hours, the world around that farmer's position ceased to exist. Howitzer shells, high explosive and incendiary, fell in a ceaseless, thunderous rain. The ground, frozen solid, heaved and shattered. Trees that had stood for a century were pulverized into kindling. Snow vaporized into steam, and the earth turned to a blackened, molten sludge. After the artillery, the planes came, dumping their payloads onto the smoldering crater field. They fulfilled Stalin's order to the letter. Not a single tree remained standing. Not a single stone was left upon another. The forest was flattened into a grotesque, smoking moonscape. The Soviet High Command declared the position neutralized. The Phantom, they were certain, could not have survived the apocalypse they had summoned. But war has a way of defying even the most absolute commands. When the Soviet scouts finally moved into the shattered wasteland, they found no body, no rifle, no evidence of the man who had cost them so dearly. The farmer, Mikko, had done the one thing the Soviet command could not comprehend. He had left. His mission was not to die a martyr, but to inflict a delay, to sow chaos, and to live to fight another day. Just before the great bombardment began, sensing the shift in the wind, the change in the bird's silence, he had gathered his spent cartridge cases, shouldered his skis, and faded back through a gully. He knew the Soviet maps did not show. He returned to the Finnish lines, reported his ammunition expenditure, and was simply reassigned. To him, it was a job done. To the Soviets, it was a supernatural defeat. To Stalin, it was an infuriating paradox. You cannot destroy a ghost with artillery. The sheer, overwhelming force he had unleashed was a testament not to his power, but to the profound vulnerability a single, determined man had exposed. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The story of the farmer sniper became a legend, but the true cost was written in the frozen mud of that cratered field. The Soviet 44th Division was shattered, not just in men, but in spirit. The delay he created allowed Finnish High Command precious days to reinforce the Kumo front, ultimately stalling the entire Soviet offensive in that sector. But let us reflect on the other side of that hill, in the Soviet camp. Imagine a young lieutenant, let's call him Alexei, from the outskirts of Minsk. He had survived the great purges of the officer corps by keeping his head down. He was a believer in the Soviet project, proud to be leading his platoon against what he was told were fascist-inspired Finns. The first few days of the advance had been tense but orderly. Then they entered that forest. The first crack of a rifle, the slump of his sergeant major, a man who had been like a father to him. The confusion, the terror, the invisible, creeping dread. Alexei did everything by the book. He deployed his men in a defensive perimeter. He called for mortar support. He tried to advance. Each logical textbook action only seemed to generate more of those precise, echoing shots. By the third day, Alexei's platoon was at half strength. The men's eyes were hollow. They jumped at the sound of a branch breaking under the weight of snow. The brotherhood of their unit, forged in training, was broken by an enemy they could not see, could not engage, could not understand. When the order finally came to pull back and let the artillery finish it, it felt less like a relief and more like a confession of profound failure. They retreated past the smoking ruins of their own trucks, past the frozen, uncollected bodies of their comrades. The loss was absolute. For Alexei, the war's purpose died in that forest. He would fight on, but the ideological certainty was gone, replaced by a numb imperative to simply keep the men alive. The Soviet Union would eventually win the Winter War through sheer grinding weight of numbers and material, but at a horrific cost that shocked the world and revealed critical weaknesses. And for the men of the 44th, the victory, when it came, was bittersweet. They remembered the price paid in an unnamed wood, to a ghost they never saw. This is the enduring paradox of such stories. We rightly celebrate the ingenuity, the resilience, the sheer grit of the underdog, the farmer defending his homeland. But in focusing on the one, we must never forget the many. 542 is not just a number. It is 542 individual stories cut short. It is 542 families who received a tersely worded telegram. It is a ripple of grief that spread across the vast expanse of the Soviet Union, from Ukraine to Siberia. The Finnish farmer was not a superhero. He was a man using his unique skills in a desperate defense. The Soviet soldiers were not faceless automatons. They were conscripts, many still boys, thrust into a war they didn't start, against an enemy they didn't hate, dying in a frozen land far from home for reasons that became meaningless in the instant a bullet found them. War reduces everything to its most essential, brutal calculus. But our remembrance must not. We must hold space for the complexity, for the tragedy on all sides, for the profound waste that is inherent in every conflict. So what did Stalin order after a single farmer killed 542 of his soldiers? He ordered the landscape itself to be punished. He sought to use a sledgehammer to kill a gnat, and in doing so, revealed a fundamental truth about tyranny and about war. The mightiest army can be confounded by the will of one determined individual fighting on his own terms, and no amount of explosive fury can erase the legacy of that act, or the memories of those who fell. The forest has long since grown back over the scars of that bombardment. Life, persistent and resilient, returned. But history remembers. It remembers the phantom of the woods, and it remembers the price he exacted. It remembers that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a shell or a bomb, but knowledge, patience, and the fierce, unyielding love for one's own soil. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The closing chapter of this tale is written not in military archives, but in the quiet aftermath that lasts for generations. The Winter War ended in March 1940 with the Moscow Peace Treaty. Finland ceded territory, but retained its independence, a moral victory snatched from the jaws of military defeat. The Soviet Union, though victorious, was bloodied and exposed, a fact Adolf Hitler noted with keen interest. But for the men who were there, the war never truly ended. The Finnish farmer, Mikko, returned to his land. We can imagine him in the years after, walking through a different stand of trees, perhaps pausing at the sound of a distant gunshot during hunting season. The flinch would be subtle, almost imperceptible. He would carry the weight of what he did, not as a burden of guilt, but as the sober knowledge of a terrible task performed in a time of necessity. He had done his duty, no more, no less. Across the new border, in what was now the expanded Soviet Union, Alexei the lieutenant likely fought in the Great Patriotic War against the Nazis. He may have risen in rank, earned medals, but somewhere deep in the recesses of his mind, in his coldest nightmares, he was back in that Finnish forest, hearing the crack of a rifle, feeling utterly, helplessly seen. Two men on opposite sides of a line on a map, forever connected by a shared experience of absolute surreal violence. This is the true, lingering cost of war. It is not just the geopolitical outcomes, the shifted borders, the balance of power. It is the silent moments that haunt the survivors. It is the veteran who cannot explain to his grandchildren why he prefers to sit with his back to the wall in a restaurant. It is the widow who sets a place at the table for a husband who never came home. It is the unanswerable question of, what if, that hangs over a million lost futures. The story of the farmer and the 542 is an extreme tale, a historical outlier. But in its extremity, it shines a light on the universal experience of the common soldier, the civilian caught in the storm, the human spirit under unimaginable pressure. It reminds us that history is not made by faceless forces, but by the decisions of individuals, both heroic and tragic, in moments of supreme crisis. Their sacrifice on all sides demands our thoughtful remembrance, our respectful reflection, and our unwavering commitment to seek peace before the first fateful shot is ever fired. Let us never forget, Stalin's order, for all its absolute fury, could not erase the tactical reality the Finnish farmer had exposed. The Red Army, for all its colossal mass, was profoundly unprepared for winter warfare. While the Finnish soldiers, like our farmer Mikko, wore white camouflage suits and moved on skis with the grace of native-born Arctic wolves, the Soviet infantrymen were clad in standard-issue dark wool greatcoats. They were stark, trembling silhouettes against the endless white. Their boots were inadequate, leading to frostbite that claimed more limbs than Finnish bullets in those early weeks. Their machines, the tanks and trucks that symbolized Soviet industrial might, were crippled by the cold. Engines froze solid without preheaters. lubricating oil turned to gel. The Great Offensive was not just being bled by a phantom sniper, it was being paralyzed by an environment its commanders had arrogantly dismissed. This was the broader context of Mikko's astounding feat. He was the sharpest point of a national spear honed by necessity. The Finnish strategy, known as Matti tactics, was one of agile, ruthless encirclement. Small, highly mobile units would ski behind Soviet columns, cut the narrow forest roads, and then isolate large enemy formations into pockets, the Mattis. Inside these pockets, the Soviets would be starved, frozen, and whittled down. Mikko's solo stand was, in essence, a one-man Matti. By creating a zone of such overwhelming psychological terror on a critical route, he achieved what an entire company might struggle to do. He halted a battalion, creating a perfect target for the wider Finnish counterstroke. His actions were not those of a lone wolf acting on a mad impulse, but a textbook application of Finnish defensive doctrine, executed with supernatural skill. Let us turn our focus now from the forest to the map room, from the tactile fear of the soldier to the strategic shockwave. When the compiled casualty reports from the 44th Division finally reached the desks of senior Soviet commanders like Kliment Voroshilov, the reaction was a mixture of disbelief and cold, careerist terror. Stalin's purges of the military in the late 1930s were a fresh, bleeding wound. Failure was often equated with treason, and treason meant a bullet in the basement of the Lubyanka. The initial reports of a single sniper were likely dismissed as the excuses of incompetent officers. But as the numbers grew and the division's advance stalled completely, a more sinister narrative was forced upon the high command. They could not and would not admit to Stalin that one man had done this. The legend of the White Death was born from this military and political necessity, a mythical, omnipresent super sniper who could be blamed for failures that were, in truth, systemic. Thus, the order for total annihilation by artillery was not just an act of rage, but a performance. It was a dramatic, overwhelming display of Soviet power intended to satisfy Stalin's demand for vengeance and to erase the evidence of a systemic tactical failure. It was meant to shout down the whispering truth. The bombardment was a message to the Finns, but more importantly, it was a message to the rest of the Red Army. Dissent, resistance, and even extraordinary enemy success would be met with absolute, annihilating force. No cost in shells was too high to maintain this illusion of control. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The aftermath of the bombardment settled over the shattered landscape like a funereal shroud. The silence that followed the last shell was deafening, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the groan of collapsing, smoldering timber. For the Soviet survivors, like young Alexei, the sight was not one of victory, but of a pyrrhic and hollow spectacle. They were ordered to advance through the wasteland their own guns had created. The ground was a treacherous moonscape of shell craters, some already filling with icy water. The stench of high explosives and scorched earth filled the air. There were no Finnish positions to overrun, no trenches to capture, only a horrific, vacant testament to the power they had unleashed. The mission had shifted from defeating an enemy to proving a point, and the point had cost them dearly in reputation, morale, and ammunition that was desperately needed elsewhere on the front. Meanwhile, miles away, Mikko had already rejoined his unit. The Finnish army's strength lay in its decentralized command and the trust it placed in its individual soldiers. A junior officer would have debriefed him. He would have given a terse, unemotional account of his ammunition expenditure and estimated delays inflicted. He would have been given a hot meal, fresh ammunition, and perhaps a few hours' rest in a kota, a traditional Finnish tent warmed by a wood stove. There would have been no ceremony, no medal pinned to his chest at that moment. The war was everywhere, urgent and unrelenting. His incredible feat was simply a part of the whole, a job well done in a nation fighting for its life. This cultural contrast is stark. In the Soviet system, the individual was a cog, and a cog that achieved too much or failed too visibly risked being hammered or discarded. In the Finnish system, the individual citizen soldier was the bedrock of the defense, trusted to use his initiative and intimate knowledge of the land. The ripples of this single engagement extended far beyond the Kumo front. While militarily it was a localized delay, psychologically it became a cornerstone of the Winter War's enduring mythos. Within Finland, stories of such snipers, often amalgamated into the legend of Simo Heiha, the most famous Finnish sniper of the war, became a vital source of national morale. They proved that the giant could be hurt, that courage and skill could offset overwhelming numbers. For the watching world, particularly in the United States, Britain, and France, these stories solidified the image of brave little Finland, standing up to the Soviet bear. It fueled sympathy and inspired limited though heartfelt support. For the Soviet leadership, however, it was a stark and embarrassing lesson. The poor performance of the Red Army in Finland was a key factor in Hitler's fateful decision to launch Operation Barbarossa in 1941. He looked at the stalled Soviet columns and the high casualties and saw a colossus with feet of clay, a fatal miscalculation that would lead to the most brutal theater of the Second World War. We must also consider the human machinery on the Soviet side. Who were the 542? They were not a monolith. In that battalion, there would have been conscripts from across the vast Soviet Empire: Ukrainians, Belarusians, Siberians, men from the Caucasus. Some were likely enthusiastic communists. Many were likely bewildered peasants, taken from their fields and handed a rifle with minimal training. They fought because not fighting meant execution by their own blocking detachments, the NKVD troops who followed behind the front lines. Theirs was a different kind of courage, not the proactive courage of the defender, but the desperate, grim courage of men caught in an impossible situation, pressed forward by political terror from behind, and faced with invisible death from the front. Their fear in that forest was multifaceted: fear of the Finnish ghost, fear of their commissars, fear of failing the motherland in the eyes of Stalin. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The closing act of this story belongs not to the strategists, but to the land itself and the memory it holds. Today, the forests near Kuhmo are peaceful. The pine trees have grown tall again, their roots perhaps still cradling fragments of shrapnel, a silent archaeology of that furious hour. If you walk there, the wind in the branches sounds like any other forest. But for the historian, the veteran, or the descendant, it is a sacred, haunted space. It is a monument to the asymmetry of war, to the power of the individual, and to the tragic, anonymous mass sacrifice that defines so much of human conflict. The farmer, whose name history may never definitively attach to this specific event, represents every citizen who must become a soldier. The hundreds of Soviet soldiers, whose names are likely recorded in some forgotten archive in rows of neat, tragic Cyrillic, represent the universal cost paid by the common man in the games of empires and ideologies. Stalin's order sought to impose a final, brutal simplicity on a complex event: destroy it all. But history is not so easily managed. The story survived. The lessons lingered. The memory of that farmer, invisible, patient, devastating resistance endures as a powerful parable. It tells us that preparation and knowledge of one's own ground are worth more than brute force. It tells us that the human spirit, when fighting for something it perceives as home and hearth, can achieve the seemingly impossible. But it also tells us, in the starkest terms, that the calculus of war is unforgiving. For every miraculous act of survival and skill, there is a corresponding toll of loss, a void in a family, a silence where there once was a voice. As we reflect on this tale from the frozen forests of 1939, let us carry forward a balanced remembrance. Let us honor the skill and the resolve of the defender without dehumanizing the attacker. Let us recognize the tactical brilliance without glorifying the killing itself. And let us ultimately remember that the greatest honor we can pay to those who endured such trials, on all sides, is to work tirelessly for a world where such desperate frozen stands are no longer necessary, where the only things falling from the sky are snowflakes, and the only echoes in the forest are the calls of birds, forever free from the crack of a rifle and the thunder of a fearful tyrant's wrath. Let us delve deeper into the mechanics of that fateful delay. What was it, precisely, that allowed one man to inflict such disproportionate damage? It was a confluence of three factors: terrain, technology, and a mindset forged by a nation's character. The terrain we have described, the close, dense forest, the deep snow, the limited sight lines, neutralized the Soviet advantages in armor and massed artillery. It was a sniper's perfect canvas. The technology was, by today's standards, brutally simple. The Finnish Mosin Nagant M2830 rifle, often equipped with a primitive but effective telescopic sight. This weapon, reliable in the extreme cold, fired the powerful 7.62 mm cartridge. But more crucial than the rifle was the ancillary gear: the skis for silent, rapid movement, and the white snowsuit that rendered Mikko a near-invisible wraith. He was a product of a society where every man knew how to ski, shoot, and navigate the wilderness from a young age. His military training did not create these skills. It merely honed and directed them for war. The Soviet conscript, by contrast, might have been a factory worker from Moscow or a collective farmhand from the steppes, for whom the Arctic forest was as alien as the surface of the moon. This asymmetry extended to command and control. The Finnish soldier operated under a concept of johtajan puuttuessa, in the leader's absence. Junior officers and even enlisted men were expected and trusted to use their initiative to make critical decisions based on the situation before them. Mikko, alone in the forest, was the ultimate embodiment of this principle. He was his own commander, intelligence officer, and quartermaster. On the Soviet side, the rigid top-down command structure, still reeling from the purges that had decapitated its officer corps, was sclerotic. A junior officer like Alexei would wait for orders from a battalion commander who was waiting for orders from division, all while under fire from an enemy that operated on a tempo they could not comprehend. The initiative, therefore, always belonged to the Finn. He decided when to shoot, when to move, and where to strike next. The Soviets could only react, and their reactions were slow, predictable, and costly. Now, consider the aftermath from a purely logistical standpoint. Stalin's order to obliterate the position consumed an enormous quantity of artillery shells and aviation fuel, resources that were not infinite. The Soviet war economy was vast, but the Winter War was a surprise, a sideshow that quickly became a resource-draining quagmire. Every shell fired into that empty forest was a shell not available for the assaults on the Mannerheim Line, the main Finnish defensive fortification. The diversion of aircraft to crater a patch of wilderness meant sorties not flown against other targets. In this light, Mikko's success can be measured not just in casualties inflicted, but in resources diverted. He forced the Soviet High Command to spend rubles and shells at 1,000-to-1 exchange rate, a catastrophic inefficiency for any army. This is the hidden strategic victory of the lone defender. He can force a colossus to waste its strength swatting at a gnat over and over again. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The psychological warfare element cannot be overstated. Before a single shot was fired, the forest itself was an ally to the Finn and an enemy to the Soviet. The sheer, oppressive silence of a Finnish winter, the way sound is muffled by the snow, creates a profound sense of isolation. For the Soviet soldier, already thousands of miles from home, this isolation was weaponized by the crack of a rifle. The sniper's greatest weapon is not the bullet, but the fear that precedes it and the uncertainty that follows. Who will be next? Where is he? Is he watching me right now? This terror breaks down unit cohesion far more effectively than a machine gun burst. A machine gun announces its location. It is a problem that can, in theory, be solved with suppressing fire or a mortar round. A single, precise sniper shot is a mystery, a taunt, a demonstration of the enemy's utter control over the environment. It makes every shadow a threat, every tree a potential hiding place. The Soviet soldiers, huddled around their stoves in immobilized trucks, were not just resting. They were prisoners of a fear their own commanders could not alleviate. We must also follow the story home, to a small farmhouse in eastern Finland, perhaps in the region of Karelia. A family, a wife, young children, aging parents, listens to the radio reports of the fighting near Kumo. They know their husband, their father, their son is somewhere in that sector. They receive no letters. The postal service is shattered. They live with a constant low hum of anxiety, tending the animals and surviving the winter as they have always done, but now with an extra place at the table that feels like a hole in the world. Their pride in his service is mingled with a dread that is almost too heavy to bear. Their sacrifice was the waiting, the not knowing, the carrying on in the face of potential absolute loss. This was the home front in Finland. Not a place of factories and propaganda posters, but of silent endurance, of hope held tightly against the cold. And what of the Soviet homeland? A telegram arrives at a communal apartment in Leningrad, or a village council office in rural Ukraine. It is brief, bureaucratic, and final. Your son, Private Ivan Petrov, displayed courage and devotion to the motherland in the fight against the white Finnish bandits. He fell in battle. The Soviet people and the Communist Party will honor his memory. There are no details, No mention of a forest or a phantom or an artillery barrage, just the void. A family is left to grieve without context, to mourn a death that seems both heroic and abstractly pointless. Their loss is sanctioned by the state, co-opted into propaganda, but their private sorrow is theirs alone. In the vastness of the Soviet Union, 542 such telegrams represented a ripple of grief that was officially ignored, but which undoubtedly left scars on the fabric of countless communities. The war's cost was paid in these intimate, silent currencies of despair. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The legacy of the Winter War, and of engagements like this one, is complex and layered. For the Finnish military, the lessons validated their doctrine of mobile defense, marksmanship, and the use of terrain. These lessons would be applied again, with grim determination, during the continuation war from 1941 to 1944. The sniper, as a psychological and tactical weapon, was cemented in Finnish military lore. For the Red Army, the humiliation of the Winter War triggered significant, if sometimes clumsy, reforms. Uniforms and equipment for winter warfare were improved, albeit slowly. The authority of military commanders was marginally increased relative to political commissars. The disastrous performance of large, unwieldy formations in broken terrain led to experiments with smaller, more flexible units. In a cruel irony, the blood shed in the Finnish snow may have contributed to the Red Army's ability to eventually survive and counterattack the German invasion, a conflict where the forests and winters of Russia itself would become their greatest allies. The story also entered the realm of global popular culture. The archetype of the lone, supernaturally skilled sniper, the White Death, became a staple of war literature and cinema. It taps into a deep-seated human fascination with the duel, the contest of wills between hunter and hunted, the individual against the machine. But in our fascination, we must be careful not to lose sight of the humanity on both ends of the scope. Mikko was not a mythical figure. He was a cold, tired man, performing a grim duty with supreme competence. The men he shot were not faceless enemies. They were individuals with their own fears, hopes, and memories, caught in a historical moment far larger than themselves. As we bring this narrative to a close, let us return to the land. The battlefield near Kumo is quiet now. The craters have softened with decades of moss and fallen needles. Young trees stand where their ancestors were vaporized. In the summer, berries grow. It is a place of peace, a testament to nature's relentless capacity to heal. But the memory persists. It persists in the history books, in the veterans associations, in the families who pass stories down through generations. It persists as a cautionary tale about the limits of raw power and the enduring strength of determined defense. Stalin's order sought to solve a problem with annihilation, but you cannot annihilate a principle. You cannot shell an idea into oblivion. The principle demonstrated in that forest, that a free man fighting for his home possesses an incalculable advantage, survived the bombardment, survived the war, and survives in our understanding of history to this day. The final word is one of somber reflection. We study such tales not to glorify war, but to understand its terrible calculus and its human face. We honor the sacrifice of all who served, regardless of side, by remembering their stories with nuance and respect. And we reaffirm a simple, profound hope that the skills of the hunter, the endurance of the soldier, and the love of one's homeland may never again be tested in the frozen forests of war, but rather in the peaceful pursuits of building, creating, and sustaining a world where such sacrifices are confined to the pages of history, never to be repeated. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten.